Thank you for joining the University of San Francisco's Museum Studies program and the Thacher Gallery tonight. My name is Samantha Chow, and it is my honor to welcome you to the opening of Elemental Exposures, Revisions of the American Landscape. Tonight's agenda will start with a brief introduction to the exhibition, which is now open at Thacher Gallery and remains on display until February 20th, 2022. We will then introduce the artists and engage in a conversation about their works in the show with some questions provided by the Curatorial Practicum class. Then we will conclude with questions from the audience. You can submit questions at any time during the event by using the Q&A button on your screen, and we will look at them during the Q&A session at the end of the event. Remember, this is a celebration, so we hope you'll send greetings to the artists in the chat. Please only submit your questions through the Q&A feature rather than the chat. We'll also be sharing additional information and resources in the chat. Finally, this event is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. We would like to begin tonight's celebration with a land acknowledgement. The Thacher Gallery at the University of San Francisco sits on the unceded land of the Ramaytush, speaking people of the Yellow tribe, one of approximately 50 independent nations now referred to as Ohlone. The Ohlone people are still here, working for their right to remain and evolve in the place we consider San Francisco. In recognition that we all benefit from this land, we encourage you to learn about the indigenous communities in the spaces you occupy, acknowledge the difficult truths of our shared histories and the ways in which these continue to shape our lives, inform yourself about current land issues and become a steward of these cultures and ecologies, and center and amplify indigenous voices in these spaces. We recognize the rich cultural heritage that has survived colonization and genocide and honor Ohlone artists, past, present, and future. We also have shared a Bay Area resource in the chat. We'd like to begin with an overview of the exhibition. This exhibition was created in collaboration with USF's MA in Museum Studies Curatorial Practicum class, led by Professor Karen Fraser, which aims to provide students with a historical and theoretical basis for exploring the varied roles of professional museum curators today. The students in this class participated in hands-on curatorial workshops in preparing for this exhibition, which includes researching and interpreting the artwork, creating the exhibition's concept and plan, guiding the design and layout choices, and developing visitor engagement activities, including this online celebration. In Elemental Exposures, artists Kristiana Chan, Binh Danh, Bessma Khalaf, and Dionne Lee help expand the canon of American landscape photography. Pushing against traditional imagery rooted in colonial perspectives toward the land, these artists bring their own identities, experiences, and conceptual approaches to envision the subject. Together, these artists raise questions such as, who has been erased from the American landscape? What stories have been lost or forgotten? And what does the land remember? Challenging pre-existing narratives makes room for new perspectives. Through the contemplation of these images, viewers are invited to reconsider their own relationship with the American landscape. Next, it is an honor to introduce the 4 artists whose artworks are featured in this exhibition. Kristiana Chan is a first-generation Malaysian-Chinese artist, writer, and educator from the American South. She is fascinated by how recent histories of racial exclusion, erasure, and extractive environmental capitalism lay the foundation for contemporary experiences and contribute to our current crisis of violent racism and climate disaster. Binh Danh is an internationally recognized artist who immigrated from America from a war-torn Vietnam at a young age. Known for his invention of the chlorophyll printing process, his newer work focuses on 19th century photographic methods. Bessma Khalaf is an Iraqi-American interdisciplinary artist who immigrated from Baghdad to the United States when she was just 12 years old. She uses photography, video, sculpture, and performance to explore the boundaries of landscape, place, and image, employing processes of degradation, such as burning and smashing. Dionne Lee grew up in New York City, where her visits to Central Park influenced a curiosity about nature. With wilderness survival manuals as a reference, she works in photography, video, and collage to explore power, survival, and personal history in relation to the American landscape. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And now I will turn to another student from the class, Alexa Canova-Parker, who will lead our conversation with the artist.
Good evening, everyone. In this next section, each artist will briefly introduce their work in the exhibition and discuss their processes. For this part, I would like to ask each artist to turn on their camera while they are speaking and then switch it off when it is the next speaker's turn. Christy, would you like to start?
Yes, thanks, Alexa. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for being here. My name is Kristiana Chan, and yeah, I'm happy to be here. So these works that I have in the show are alternative process photographs. This first body of work on the left here is called Bodies of Water, and is a series of 49 seawater developed cyanotypes. So this work was kind of conceived, I was thinking about my connection to the landscape, my disconnection from my ancestors through the processes of migration and displacement, and began sort of thinking about the ocean as an ancestor. I'm a swimmer and a surfer, and so that relationship had been developing. And so this work was sort of my exploration into that idea. Many, I guess, so the process of making this work was I would go and visit different sites around the Bay Area where Chinese fishermen used to live and work to like sustain themselves during the gold rush and like the post-gold rush era. I would cast a net into the water, and the way that it would land, I would expose it and then develop it and fix it in the seawater. So the thought was that pieces of the salt, of the environment that might remember the lives that had lived there previously would be somehow embedded in the image. And so this was a series that I did, repeatedly visiting these sites around the Bay Area. And then this piece on the right, sort of a continuation of a similar process. This is a lumen print positive. So similarly, a contact print made without a camera, exposing directly onto the sheet of emulsified paper. This work was sort of an extension of that process, again, visiting coastal sites. It was made during the early stages of the pandemic when everything was really crazy and shifting and just very tumultuous. I began observing these kelp bodies in the intertidal zones every day and seeing and noticing how suited they were for just this space of intense daily environmental change. And so just observing them as bodies and seeing how they were adapted and how they would move and how they would just thrive in this environment that was so drastically different throughout different points of the day. Again, I would develop it on site. So there's water and salt and sand that would get exposed into the image as well. I think that's all I have to say about this for now.
Thank you, Christy. Ben?
Yes, hello. Thank you so much. I want to thank the curatorial team for putting this exhibit together, and I can't wait to see it in person. These are two examples of my work in the exhibit. Sentinel Rock is on the left, and Yosemite Falls is on the right. It's kind of magical that you pick these two pieces too, because they actually do face each other in Yosemite Valley. So they're mirroring each other in a way, looking at each other. And this work is done with the daguerreotype process. So I do find my work kind of very traditional in the ways of one would think about alternative photographic processes. I'm just using a 19th century process, the daguerreotype, which was the first commercially viable process that was invented in 1839 by Louis Daguerre. And of course, that launched photography. And during the time when it was explored by other photographers, majority of the work was portraiture. Of course, likeness, people want to see themselves, want to see photographs of themselves. So there was a lot of photographic portrait studios throughout the world, but there wasn't too many landscape photographs, landscape daguerreotypes. So with that idea, I wanted to use this, this process to photograph the land and going out to the national park, starting off with Yosemite Valley and continuing to other national parks in the Western United States. And for me, the work is really about thinking about the landscape, thinking about our sort of relationship to the land. One of the unique thing about the daguerreotype process, which you can't see in this reproduction, is that it's a mirror image. It's actually very shiny. So the viewer also see themselves in the photographic image. They also become part of the land, thinking about their relationship to this place, especially the national park, this federal space where it's akin to our sort of constitution, akin to the pursuit of happiness and things like that. So these are some of the ideas that hopefully are imbued in the work, and definitely there's the stuff I think about when I go to the national park. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Bessma?
Hello. Hi, am I there?
Yes, you're good.
Yes, you're good.
Hi, and thank you for inviting me to be part of the show. I'm very excited to see it in person as well. My name is Bessma, and yeah, I'll just start talking about this work here in the show. The piece on the left is We're Not Hoodoos. This is part of a series of ongoing work that I've been working with for a while now. It's a series that was inspired by actually the video that's in the show. It's not in these slides, but maybe that's motivation for whoever's there to go check out the show. But basically, I was doing a lot of walks on the beach, and during that time, I would contemplate, just sitting there watching a sunset, and I had this strange thought of what would happen if the sun actually fell out of the sky. These are the strange thoughts that go through my head sometimes. And I really wanted to illustrate that. And so I worked with that video and kind of made it happen. But from making that video, I also started to love the idea of burning landscapes and creating new landscapes from them. And so that's what you see on the left and on the right. They're from the same series. But basically what I do is I burn a photograph, a found image. And once it's burned, I basically sift through the ashes and rearrange the ashes. Sometimes they actually create their own without me having to do anything. Like in hoodoos, as you can see to the right, where the ashes kind of start mimicking the mountains to the left. And that's kind of when things get really exciting, because I just don't know what happens when I start burning things. Sometimes the whole image is obliterated, and sometimes really magical things happen. Like, I don't know if this image is doing it, but also in the upper corner, you start seeing these dark areas where it almost reminds me of space and the universe. And then I kind of I like these things that happen kind of by chance a lot of the time. I do manipulate the ash and I love blending it in with the landscape, so you can't see where the land starts and where the image ends, or in like where the ash starts. I don't know if that makes sense, but also sometimes just the way the ashes land, as in the picture on the right, those are Bridal Veil Falls in Yosemite, and it almost looks like they're actually falling and crumbling, and in front of the waterfall you can see, and those are just a couple pieces of ashes, but they look like rock. And those are kind of the things that really excite me about making that work, because each piece ends up being totally different and its own thing. Yes, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Dionne?
Hello. Great, I'm here. Thanks for having me. And I also want to thank everyone for coming and being here. And I also just want to congratulate the students for putting this show together. It must feel really great to have it done and real in front of you. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a general introduction of my work, and then I'll talk about what's on the slideshow. But as Samantha mentioned earlier, I work in photography, collage, and video, and I'm really interested in ideas around survival as well as ancestral and personal history as it relates to the American landscape. And for me, that means really understanding American soil as like a site of trauma. And with that, I look to larger historical narratives as basically like a touchstone for understanding how history acts as a system that can determine autonomy and resilience of a group of people across time, and also how that shows up in my personal life. I'm also interested in like the complications that exist within photographic representations of American land, as I know we all are who are in this show. And I'm mostly interested in when landscape or space becomes, when it is refuge or when it is danger, or when it can sometimes feel like both. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Fleet, which is on the right side. And that piece in particular for me really speaks to this both and of the refuge and danger, which is a persistent theme for me. But this piece came about after I had I went on a sailing trip with a friend, where I actually felt both of those feelings of like, this is amazing and like beautiful, and it was like sunset and we're having a really wonderful time. But I also felt really uneasy being in a sort of like open, wide ocean space. And that was primarily because I understand water to be a political space that has lots of historical baggage. And for me, the sail itself serves as like a symbol, one that both speaks to like the freedom of travel and exploration, but also what can come under the guise of like exploration, such as genocides of Indigenous people and the transatlantic slave trade. And even thinking about, again, back to my personal history, when I consider the fact that my ancestors came to this country or brought to this country over, a large body of water in a ship, in the belly of a ship, I think a lot about how that ancestral trauma moves through generations. And I think partially explains my uneasiness during that sailing trip. But what's happening in this picture is that there's just an image of a boat sail that's been repeated. Each image has different manipulation that was created by maneuvering the picture on a scanner bed. And that movement was really meant to like abstract the sail and morph it into something that I view as looking a little bit more like sinister. And even while I was making this, I was thinking about two perspectives, like that of the person who's guiding the ship, right, to some like unfamiliar land with that sense of freedom and discovery, and also from the perspective of like who is on the land, right, and what they might see in terms of like a threatening object changing shape, right, as it moves closer and appears larger. And I'll also just briefly, I forgot to start my timer, so I'll briefly try and mention that just in general, a really important question for me in my practice is thinking about who is best positioned to survive. And for me, that question is always relevant as we are collectively growing to consider more deeply systems and historical structures that are meant to protect some and endanger others from risk like climate chaos or pandemics, right? As well as acknowledging those who experience survival as this like active attempt made every day. And even thinking back generationally, right? Like we're all here because other people survived. And so to explore this question, I do engage with a lot of these, what seem to be antiquated wilderness survival skills as a metaphor for, I look to those skills as a metaphor for how we can collectively like weather contemporary challenges. And the last thing I'll just say is that I primarily work in the darkroom, and my photographs are collaged or juxtaposed with found images such as the sail. And they're repurposed all through the silver gelatin process. One as a gesture to kind of reclaim some of the narratives that are often associated with like traditional American landscape photography, but then there's also this element of engaging in analog processes that is important to me because it really mirrors the very nature of all the survival skills that I have studied the past few years in my research. They're both like physical, right, and primal and very instinctual. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it there. I'll say more later. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Dionne. Thank you all for giving us that wonderful overview of your work. I find all your processes very magical. Next, I will ask a couple of questions that the students from this year's curatorial practicum wish to ask the artists in order to get a better understanding of the artwork. Just a reminder that these are not Q&A from the audience. If you have any questions you would like the artist to answer, then please remember to submit them to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer as many as possible in the last portion of the event. Artist, would you mind all turning on your cameras? And just a reminder to please turn on your mic when speaking. Our first question. A lot of the work in the exhibition raises questions of identity in relation to the American landscape or the canon of landscape photography. How do these ideas influence your work? Bessma, would you like to start?
Hi, sure. I consider, so basically my relationship to the American landscape is complicated. So basically, on one hand, I feel so lucky to have immigrated here right before the war, and I live the life that I live in California, one of the most beautiful parts of America. Yet I have this inner guilt about it. I love America, yet it's the country that I watch destroy my own country, being from Iraq. You know, it's a really kind of intense relationship. And so it's a love-hate relationship, I guess. When people look at my work, I want them to look deeper than just the surface. When I burn the pieces, basically I create new worlds. And so I feel like from destruction comes rebirth in a weird way. My favorite things that happen in the process is that it's that, you know, there's this kind of, I feel like destruction is always looked upon as this negative thing, but really it can be quite positive, kind of like, you know, when a phoenix burns and like, you know, they kind of come out of their ashes, and I don't know, that's kind of where I'm at with it. But yeah,
That was great.
I think that's where, yeah.
Thank you. All right, Ben, would you like to respond to that question?
Yes, sure. You know, I study photography traditionally, like most of us here on the panel. You know, looking at 20th century photography, I just see a lot of white men with big cameras, and I wanted to sort of insert myself as an Asian guy with a big camera. And so doing landscape photography has been something I've been doing since, you know, the beginning of my studies. So I definitely think a lot about, you know, the history of the land where I'm standing. And even, for example, in the Sierra Nevada, there's obviously many Asian people, Chinese labor working in those places I photographed. But throughout history, they were never represented in ways as these wilderness scenes are represented in photographer like Watkins, which I heard you have some of Watkins photographed in the exhibit, as well as Ansel Adams. So, you know, I definitely want to change the canyon of landscape photography, you know, from this 21st century perspective, using a 19th century process invented by the French, which kind of, you know, give birth to tourism and travel photography and all that sort of, you know, photography traveling the globe, looking for exotic places to photograph. And for me, like, the American landscape is quite exotic too, because coming to the United States, you know, I was really, I always wanted to go camping, but my parents never thought it was a good idea, because for them, the word camp is kind of associated to refugee camp. You know, like, why would you want to go out to the wilderness and spend weeks in, you know, in harm's way, which we already did that for a whole year. We were in Malaysia at a refugee camp. So that, you know, I wanted to explore that idea, explore, you know, why don't people of color go out to the wilderness? You know, because it's never been visually a space for people like me. You know, it's always visualized in the media as this very kind of white space. So, you know, those are, again, those are stuff I think about when I think about the work. And like Bessma, I do share that feeling too, that, you know, I'm living in this amazing country, you know, which allow me to pursue, you know, a degree in art and live out this life as an artist. But it comes with also complication too, because, you know, when I was introduced to landscape, it wasn't through sort of, you know, landscape photograph. It was through the war of Vietnam, you know, growing up, looking at pictures of the Vietnam War and looking at the land there. And that's how I got into landscape, because I was really thinking a lot about that particular land that was heavily bombed. And then, of course, you know, the landscape here, the national park is also very complicated too, because the development of the national park through the development of the national park, indigenous people were pushed off the land. And there was writing by John Muir saying that they're not using the land the correct way. It was sort of this more American or European perspective on the land, and those are again just stuff that I hope people will see when they look at the work. When they go visit Yosemite Valley and look at Three Brothers, which is an amazing landmark, but that landmark is named after a conflict. It was when the California militia captured the sons of Chief Tenaya and at the base of those rocks. So they named those three formation as Three Brothers. So deep within these places that we visit is very conflicted, and hopefully that those stories will be known and shared through the work of artists on this panel and through just educational institution to spread those messages. Thank you.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you. And artists, feel free to talk to each other and respond to each other as well. So Dionne, would you like to share next?
Yeah, and I actually was going to speak back to Binh because so much of what you said really resonated with me. I was actually writing some things down. I was like, I hope I remember to say this. But just when you were talking about the white man with the big cameras, which is also something I definitely am interested in interrogating, which I actually don't even use. I use a very small camera. I shoot medium format mostly and use a lot of found images, really thinking about how else we can work to represent, landscape. And even what you were saying about camping, all that stuff really resonated with me. And another parallel was just, talking about who was removed from national parks, right? And for me personally, I grew up in New York City, so I didn't have a lot of access to what's considered wilderness spaces, but I often bring up that in my work, I grew up across the street from Central Park, where there was once a community of free and affluent Black folks who lived there who were removed to make Central Park. And so there's just so much, there's been, and obviously before them, the Lenape people were, forcibly removed and killed. So I think there's just this acknowledgement of the level of removal that has happened, right, constantly of people. But to the larger question of just how my identity influences my work, right? Definitely part of that is growing up in New York City and being a city kid and not having access to these sorts of spaces. And really, my work initially came from my own grappling and trying and wanting to feel safe in these spaces and not always fully understanding why I didn't feel that way. And this is also I'm someone who actually loves being outdoors. I like camping, I like going hiking, I studied herbalism, I have experience with foraging, but to some degree, I do find a lot of comfort in the outdoors, but a big part of my practice is looking backwards and looking into history and towards ancestral experiences so that I can make sense of my relationship to those spaces. And so, when I when I at the same time can hold the truths of the failure of 40 acres and a mule, right, for formerly enslaved people, the truth of migration not being a choice, right, but just another way of working to navigate towards freedom that never really becomes fulfilled, the truth of forced labor to literally make stolen land profitable for those who are oppressing you, right? I can make sense of all of my dis-ease in those spaces when I really hold all of those things at the same time. And it's all super complicated, like Bessma and Binh had already spoke to. But I don't know, understanding all of those things too, for me, leads me to think about even redefining what wilderness counts as wilderness, which is oftentimes people talk about it, as this untamed land that's not hospitable for people, but I actually think it matters who's occupying that space with you, who's present, visible or not, right? Who has the power over that space? That's actually for me what defines it, because without some sort of human entity, you know, turning the land into a tool or giving it some sort of, I don't know. I'm just saying, like, we're the problem. Like, it's not the land, right? It's like us as people. Yeah, I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Thank you. Christy, you're up.
Whew, okay. All of those responses just prompted like so many ideas and stuff. So I'm just trying to like find the thread to begin. Yeah, I resonated with a lot of what the previous panelists have already spoken about in terms of like relationship to the landscape and like just all of the traumatic histories of land and power and borders and all of those things. I think for me, a lot of my approach to like landscape and capturing landscape and interacting with it has been through the elements of it. So thinking like specifically like the element of like water, or the elements of like soil or air or fire, like I think there is just so much wrapped up in like the representational sort of static image of landscape photography and sort of like the tradition or the canon of landscape photography that I think I really found it kind of distracting to work with the imagery. And again, looking through like archives, looking through like all, you know, like just California landscape photography and how that was like commissioned. So it would be portrayed a certain way. So it would entice like settlers to come out and like violate the land, basically. Like, look at this like pristine, untouched land for you to come and like take whatever you want. Right. And so from the beginning of like California, like being settled, it's all been a lie. And so I think my approach to it was sort of thinking about how can I like consider my own relationship with like being an immigrant and like being in California and having this relationship with the water and having this relationship with the land. And just like, what is my place in it? Like, do I have a place in it? Like, do I belong here? Like, what would that even feel like for me to think about? And so a lot of why I turned to the waters, because, well, there's so many reasons why, but it's just literally, it's like the element that like our body is composed of is water, and the water is saline. And so thinking about like our body's connection to salt water and sort of thinking more elementally, thinking about like the memory of these elements, right? It's like the sand and the soil and the water and the salt have been there, predates like all of us. And so thinking about these elements as ancestors, as well as materials that have passed through the bodies of my ancestors, and thinking about how, when my body is in those spaces, I am interacting with them in that way, sort of like in a metaphysical, but also very physical, like elemental way. I keep using that word, but so I think thinking about a lot of the work comes from thinking about how could I capture, you know, it's photography, but how can I capture not just the light of the idea or the moment or the time that I'm trying to capture, but how can I also capture the memory of these people that history has excluded and photography has excluded. And Binh was talking about how so much of California was built like by Chinese labor, and yet like there's so few, if like no written records of them. They were just like completely excluded and left out. And so thinking about like, how can I'm never going to be able to like go back and reclaim actual things that were lost. Like the things that were lost, those stories, their lives, their names are lost. But this process of sort of going to these places and having my body interact with the elements of that place, being in the water, being in the mountains, digging through like mining tailings, which it's toxic, don't do it. And just sort of thinking about the process as a medium to sort of transmit those memories through the material. and using photographic processes to sort of use those like materials to actually capture images is sort of like what I landed on. I think that answers, that's all I want to say about that for now.
That was great. Thank you. Thank you all. I wanted to give the opportunity to you all to, if you wanted to discuss amongst each other or address anything that one of you had said during this, for this question, you have the opportunity to do that now, or I can also move on to our next question.
I would just like to say that it's just really amazing to see the, you know, the thread that goes through all of our thoughts, and, you know, the way we come up with ideas, and they're so different yet they're so similar, and I just really find that really interesting and lovely.
Great. So the next question is, what would you like viewers to take away from your work? And we can start with Dionne.
Yeah, this question's always kind of difficult for me, but mostly because I guess I just, I don't even mean this in like a bad way at all, but I'm not always thinking about the viewer when I'm making my work, right? So it's all like, I honestly make my work for me. But with that said, what's really important to me is that I think that, like, for all artists, like, we're here to generate thought in others, right? Not necessarily to like dictate our own ideas. I mean, we are in this kind of way, but you know, I have very concrete ideas about what my work is about, and I of course want viewers to understand that. But I also, and it might be because I'm a teacher, I think I get most excited when if someone can discover their own ideas or have like a door open in their brain from engaging with my work. And that to me is like the highest compliment if it ever happens. But, you know, I'm not so concerned that they like understand my ideas perfectly, but that they can, that somehow my work can become a pathway for them to discover their own ideas or develop a deeper understanding with them. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I never thought of it that way before. So thank you for sharing that.
I tell my students, I was like, your job is to help people think, not to like tell them what to think, you know?
Yeah. All right, thanks. Binh, how about you?
I think I mentioned a little bit in my first answer, but I you know, for me, it's you know, for the viewer, you know, mainly just to have them visit the national park. I think that's one thing for sure. Just to get outside, get outdoors. The idea of element, it's very interesting too, elemental for me. Thinking about the photographic process or the daguerreotype process, where it's basically silver and iodine, mercury, all these elements that have been here since the beginning of time, and are, you know, used now in this art material for just to hold this message. And of course, you know, the message really comes from the viewer, right? Wherever that message could be. But it's I think I have a really hard time answering this question too, but I think, you know, what I definitely wanted to express is that how complicated these work are in this, you know, it might look simple, and it's framed as alternative processes, which is in a way is already seen as like a in the general sort of photography realm of capital, you know, P. It's you know, it's not is it photography? It's not photography, but I think that's what is challenging. It's also challenging the medium too, and I think that's really important to talk about. because we live in a time where photography, it sort of seems like or the photographic process itself is, we don't even think about it as a photographic process. We think about it as, as taking a picture, that we're taking a picture, always sort of taking. But with this work in the show here, I feel like, what the artists are doing, they're giving, right? They're giving this work out in a way. And, the show is also framed as a revision of the American landscape too. So I think that revision is also very important too. Within a lot of this work is not just about the landscape, but also about the body. I think a lot of the work is, majority of us are really talking about the historical body, the body in the present moment, the body looking at the work. And those are those ideas I hope people walk away with, to see themselves in relationship to this work and to this land that the work is talking about.
Thank you so much. And I love how people are bringing up elements because it's in our title, elemental exposure. So it's very relevant. And I like how Kristi, you talked a little bit about elements in nature sense, but then Binh, you introduced kind of chemical elements for photography. So that's kind of part of it where we're going is elements in so many different types of states and forms. So thank you guys. Kristi, would you like to respond to the question next?
Sure. Yeah. I think for me, gosh, what's the question? What do I want people to walk away with when they see? I think I don't know. I think similarly to Dionne, I'm not thinking about this question in the making, right? I'm so immersed in like my own like emotions and feelings and just sort of wrestling with like the mind beast that to just get something out. I think maybe I would say like I want people to feel a little bit of what I feel when I'm thinking about these things, which is kind of haunted, kind of feel like grief. There's a loss, there's an intangibility, like an unattainability of something that is gone. And I think I talk about the process of memory and the sort of feeling of memory or losing a memory as like when you just wake up and you're trying to remember a dream and you dreamt something and it's there, but you can't. It's like that feeling of like you're losing what that dream was and what happened. I feel like if the viewer has like any of that sense when they see the work, then I would feel good about it. I would feel like, okay, I did something of my job, right? Because yeah, I think that's very much of like what I'm trying to transmute as an artist, working with these materials.
That was great. Bessma?
I just minimized everybody. Hi. So for me, I mean, I agree completely with Dionne, Kristiana, and Binh. And on top of that, for me too, is like my favorite part about, or what I wish for people to get is to bring their own experience to my art. And when I make work, I make it for myself and I make it from where I'm coming from, with my own history and my own background. But then when somebody looks at it that's from a completely different background and gets something completely different, they'll look at the piece and they'll just tell me, oh, this is about, whatever, but it comes from another place and it's just as valid and just as beautiful. Their thoughts and ideas, that they put on this work that I made for myself, but they're getting something out of it. And for me, when a viewer gets that, that's the part that makes me so happy when I am at an art opening and I get to talk to people about what they got out of seeing the work. And yeah, because making art is so insular, you're just making it for yourself. You're doing these things that are like living inside your head. and then you put them out in the world, and you just, you know, to hope that everybody gets you is, for me, I think is kind of silly, because we all come from such different backgrounds. And I don't know, I think the most magical thing that happens is when I get to talk to somebody and they tell me something that I completely didn't even think about that would trigger in somebody else. And that those are like the moments that are like the most magical to me.
Thank you. We now have reached the last section of the night, the Q&A from the audience. Please feel free to continue to post your questions in the Q&A. We'll try our best to answer each question submitted by our audience. Without further ado, first question, where does your desire to produce art come from? And you can go ahead and jump in.
Well, I think my desire to make art comes from just it comes from a pretty like unhappy place in a weird way. Like it's something that I'm struggling with. And so instead of, you know, doing something just self-destructive, instead I'll try to explore and research and like get into something. I don't know if that makes any sense to anyone else, but you guys can kind of get in on that. But for me, that's kind of, it starts in a kind of a hard place, and it kind of takes me to a place where I can, I guess it's like positive, letting go of like bad energy in a positive way. I don't know, that's kind of how art starts for me, but difficult thoughts and then kind of taking them in a direction and then having them kind of land somewhere and then, yeah, exploding into something else.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just about, it's how I process anything, like how I process really complicated feelings or hard feelings, as Bessma was saying, you know, it's just literally like how I work through my own thoughts, right? Or my own like existence. It's a language, you know, and so we're all speaking that language. Yeah, that's, I guess, came on short. Processing.
I want to talk about existence too, because that's the reason why I make art is, you know, I fear dying. Actually, it's my way of living. It's my way of breathing. It's sort of my also spiritual practice. I think that's pursuit of sort of exploration has always been with me since I was a kid, and it's the reason why I make work, is I am looking for answer for myself, answer in the world, answer in this universe, why we're here. And these are ideas that are so important. You know, there's larger ideas, that's the big one, why we're here, to other ideas that, you know, touch issues of immigration, war, everything that sort of affects my life and the people who are around me. So that's the reason why I think I do what I do, is just because it's been a language that I sort of honed through years of just making, and it's important to continue doing it. And you know, like when I take a picture, I'm not really thinking about you know, posting this picture on Instagram and sharing it with the folks who are gonna be there checking those posting. It's more about the future. It's more about knowing that maybe this picture will be around after I'm gone, and people can actually look at the time that we live in and think about what were the artists were doing back then. And I think that's sort of, you know, I tell my students, that's really how you know, how culture is produced and how people know about civilization, by looking at the artwork they make. And you know, we live in such an interesting times that you know, all these sort of digital arts or NFTs and things like that is out there, as well as traditional processes. So it's really exciting actually to be an artist, and I think it's just, it never gets boring, I gotta say.
Yeah, I think for me, I just never wanted to do anything else. Like, and sometimes it's like this wonderful liberating thing, and sometimes it feels like a mental illness. Like I feel I'm just seeing Dionne's reaction. Where it feels like I'm trying to speak a language that doesn't exist yet. And I'm trying to like create space in it. And sometimes when I'm able to tap into something new and something creative and think, and something that feels true, it's like the most liberating feeling. It feels like I'm able to free myself a bit from sort of the things that I feel trapped by every day. It's worth it. And then I think other times I'm just like, why? Like, you know, no one chooses to be an artist to like have an easy, like stable life. Like I think a lot of us do it just because I feel like we have to. It's something that's just like a part of me, and for better or for worse, it's like with me, and I'm in it and I'm doing it, and it's never boring. Yeah, that's the other thing. It's never boring.
Great. I have the next question is for Bessma, but I think it could apply to others as well. How many photographs go through this process to make the final cut that you add into the series? I guess it's also a good question thinking about for artists. How do you know when to stop?
Well, so it's one of those things where one day I will get into the studio and just start the process of burning. And sometimes I get one image that I'm happy with, and sometimes I get 0. And sometimes I get like 3 that day, you know, and it all varies. And that's part of the, I think that's part of the fun and excitement of it, because you just never know what's going to happen. But also there is this point where it's like, do I need to stop with this? Like, there's always these, you know, questions. Like, it's not like I mean, sometimes it is like, it works out right away and I'm like, okay, but there are some images where I have to sit and like work with them. I might actually have to introduce a new image and like merge 2 together, or take from another image and blend with another one. And so there's a whole process to it, and also depends on my mood that day. Like, but yeah, it varies, but many go into it. Like some days I burn like 10 images and I get 0. And some days, you know, it's great. All 10 work. I don't know. Hope that answers it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Dionne, Christy, or Binh, did you want to respond to that about kind of knowing where to stop and how long it takes you to, and when you maybe want to transition to making a new type of work or using a new type of series or something like that?
Sometimes I feel like I don't finish anything unless I have a deadline, because like, honestly, it just doesn't happen. I'll work on something and like it'll trail off and I'll start something else, and then I'll get distracted and I won't do anything for a few days, and then someone's like, oh yeah, we need you to deliver the work by like next Monday, and I'm like, okay, then it's done. That's kind of how it goes for me.
On some degree, some of I feel like sometimes the work is never really done, you know, or I feel like even as I think about it as a body of work, sometimes I've had people ask me questions around why I don't work in more like strict concrete like series. And I think that's also like comes from like photography being like, you know, a series is like a set of 20 images and that's it for your series, you know, and I just don't actually, I see all the work as one long series and like iterations of similar thoughts and processes. But also working with collage, at least in terms of like how you know when something's done, I find really exciting because I really enjoy the process of messing up or like making mistakes or on my collages and then deciding like, how do I fix this? Like, just do I cut it out? Do I glue something on top? Do I do, you know, just trying to not give up on a piece is kind of fun, and just trying to see how can I get you to a point where I don't think I have to do anything else. And that's not even like it's finished, just like there's nothing else I can, like you are, where we reached the end of what I can do here.
I didn't know that. Your work always looks so great at the end. All right, Binh.
Well, I really don't have much to say other than it's just a process of selecting the work, you know, for a series. So it's just do a process of elimination, and at least in my work with the daguerreotype process is that the work that I don't want, I just polish the image away, and there it goes. It disappeared, no longer there, and then replate the copper plate with silver and try again next time. So
Great, thank you all. All right, another question. Thank you all for this very inspiring presentation and dialogue. Can you talk about how climate change, and specifically the recent fires in California, is impacting your practice? Also, many of you are teachers. How do you navigate inspiring your students to take on these difficult topics through photography? Thank you.
well, I could answer the last question first in ways that photography, I think it's been a medium that is, depending on how you use it, could be, you get the result right away. And I think it's really great just to explore ideas, you know. You know, my students really enjoy working this way. You know, they're not good with painting or any other sort of medium, but they hone to photograph, and because it's more about the vision, you know, it's more about looking, seeing, and collecting. And the other part of the question, so I'm trying to, where is that question? I think it disappeared, but it's about climate change and the fires, and if that hinder my work in ways, or our work in ways, and yeah, I think of course it did. You know, you heading out there into the landscape, you gotta be aware of what you might encounter. You know, it's always shocking too. You know, you see those footage of people camping, and then a fire just kind of comes and starts, and it's really scary actually. I mean, people out there just trying to enjoy their weekends, and it just reminds us of the time we live in, right? Droughts, climate change, climate warming, the Anthropocene, you know, which I think, you know, the definition is of that is, you know, the nature is changing because of man, because of human involvement. And I think we can also change it back too. I think that's also really, really important. You know, when I was growing up, like the ozone was such a big thing, and you know, we didn't use hairspray and stuff like that, and we tried to correct for that, and we were able to reverse that. I think we, in a time, we could still do that. I think it's still possible. And I know Robin Lasser also put a question regarding that, in a way about, you know, about the fear of dying. It's not like I'm fear of dying. I know we live in a time where COVID is such around us and so much stuff in the news these days. It's more about, as she mentioned, more about the remembering, you know, memento mori, you know, in a ways. And I think that's the reason why, you know, I do what I do as an artist. But anyway, I'm just chatting along here, so I'll pass the mic to someone else. So.
I think for me, it just was like by chance that I happened to be burning things, and then all the fires were happening at the same time. And then it was just kind of like, oh, like weird premonition, possibly. But also I I've been going out into some of these burned landscapes actually and collecting wood and parts to like work on a new series that I'm working on at the moment. And so it is impacting my work in that I'm actually using it, which is a little weird, but it's also like, again, from destruction, you can make something, you know. And then the beautiful thing is, even though the stuff just burnt like last year, you know, I went to some of the places where it was obliterated last year, and then there's already plants there, they're growing. It's not the end, like just because it's burning. Fires have always existed in California, and us as humans have kind of encroached on nature in such a way in this, we're like reaching to these depths of these forests, you know, and maybe it doesn't want us there. Maybe it's trying to kick us out. Maybe we need to leave nature alone a little bit. Partially, you know, it's like land always burned. I mean, for the forest to be able to kind of keep itself invigorated, it needs to burn. But what's happening is, as more and more humans are like moving deeper into the forest, they're going to get impacted, but it's not nature's fault. Like, it's going to do its thing no matter what. So maybe we need to just kind of chill out and pull back, or, you know, we might get eaten by the fires. I don't know. I can be a little, I'm on the side of nature sometimes a little bit more than humans.
I feel that for sure. For me, I think, well, I moved to California actually in the middle of like towards the end of that drought, or it's, you know, it's supposedly still happening, but it was just an interesting time to arrive at a place and have to think about something I've never really had to think about before, like my water usage. And moving to California definitely kind of, I think, kickstarted, like I said, I was always interested in nature, and like, you know, I studied herbalism before moving to California, but it really kind of kickstarted this interest in these survival skills, which I will say it's kind of a weird thing to be really into in general, but because there's some people who are into it and it's kind of scary and like really highly problematic. But with that aside, I think that just experiencing the wildfires while I was there was more psychologically difficult than I think I could even really explain. And I think it took a while for it to really like show up in my work. There's pieces in the show, but I have made work kind of talking about fire and thinking about its dual forces, kind of like what Bessma was saying, which is like it has this ability to be really destructive, right? But it also has the capability of like renewal, right? And bringing new life to the surface. And again, that fits into just my general interest of this like duality, right? Like when are these spaces refuge? When is it danger? How do you navigate that? How do you look towards yourself and understand your own role in it? And how do you, as Bessma was saying, and that's what Binh was saying, like, how do you think about what's my role to like help, you know, rectify the damage, right? So that's like, you know, not using hairspray, but also not like shooting off a firework at your like gender reveal party or something like that, right? Like in the middle of the desert. So, but yeah, I feel like I had more to say, but I just love hearing everyone else talk. It's great. Thank you.
All right, I think we have a final question, and we will have to keep this short, but thank you all so much for sharing your work and experiences with us. I'm curious about this notion of the American landscape, which to me seems like such an arbitrary category. What does that word mean to each of you? And how do you situate your work within that categorization? And Christy, let's start with you.
Oh my goodness, that's such a juicy question. Let me
right?
read it real quick.
Or if someone else is ready, they can go too. I just wanted to.
I like that American landscape is in quotes, because that is a completely arbitrary designation. I think that's an important part of the question as well. I need a minute on, I need a minute on this one. Sorry.
No problem. Dionne, Bessma, or Ben, you're welcome to jump in.
Where is the question? Sorry.
Yes, so
I think I can go now.
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I just need a minute to like fully digest it. I feel like where I situate myself within this idea of, again, American landscape is, again, just thinking, again, like elementally, like materially, like what, like I think those sort of like categorizations of like, what is landscape? What is American? Whose land is this? You know, I think are really complicated. And for me, I don't like, in the question of like, whose lands is this? Like, this is Indigenous land and I am not Indigenous and I am not from this country. But does that mean like, I don't have a place here? Like, I don't think that's what that means either. And so that's why I rely so heavily on like, just like the material aspects of things. I also think for me, thinking about sort of like the ecosystem and like thinking about these places and the elements that compose these places as living and as a part of us, right? I think so many times in this conversation, we've referred to, and I think this happens all the time, where we refer to nature as something separate from humans. I'm even referring to like chemical elements as separate from like natural elements, and like they're the same thing. It's just like our human designation that like creates like that separation. And so I think a lot of my work is trying, like, and sort of my personal process is trying to like heal that sort of human versus nature like rift, where we have this sort of conscious separation from our world and our landscape because of, I don't know, like, I don't even know, because maybe it would be a much more difficult to like perform such extractive capitalism and violence against the land if we actually considered ourselves like a part of it and like a part of the thing that we are taking from. And so I think for me, that's sort of my stance and my relationship to the landscape or to the work, and how I'm like approaching my thoughts and thinking on this.
Great, thank you. If one other artist wants to respond, and then unfortunately we have to wrap up for the evening.
I just want to say that, you know, the American landscape is changing, and you know, people are freaking out about it, and it's going to change. It's gonna, you know, it's representation. I think that's the thing that's important to me, that, you know, that artists who are dealing with these difficult matter are represented in shows like this here and elsewhere. And I think it's really important that we define this meaning of the American landscape.
Thank you, artists and audience. Now I will turn to another student from the class, Becca Seymour.
Hi, thank you, Alexa, and thank you to our wonderful artists for sharing your work and experiences with us. I want to respect everyone's time and start wrapping up, because I know that it's getting late for Dionne, who's joining us from Ohio. But thank you to everyone in attendance for joining us. Christy, Ben, Bessma, and Dionne, my co-hosts Sam and Alexa, my behind-the-scenes teammates Amy and Victoria, and me tonight. A giant thank you to our professor, Karen Fraser. We would also like to thank Nell Herbert, Gloria Simmons, Andrea Gonzalez, Luca Ameri, and Steve Ryan, and everyone from the Thacher Gallery, along with our classmates in this year's Museum Studies Graduates Curatorial Practicum. Please stay safe and have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming.